Thank you for listening to another episode of First and Tenn, a Tennessee Titans podcast brought to you by the Nashville Post. I'm your host, Michael Gallagher. I'm the sports reporter for the Post. Unfortunately, Austin is no longer with us. Well, that sounds really grim. He didn't die or anything. His internship ended with us. He is back at Missouri. We'd like to thank him for the work that he did over the summer. He was a regular guest on our podcast. We miss having him around. But fear not, we are joined by what Gover likes to call the GOAT of Nashville, Teresa Walker. She covers pretty much anything that goes on in the state of Tennessee for the Associated Press, Titans, Vanderbilt, Vols, Preds, you name it, she's there. And we are lucky to have her on because she's in between radio stuff. She's been in high demand. So Teresa, we really appreciate you making the time for us today.
My pleasure, Michael. Always love watching what you do and happy to join in.
I appreciate it. So I think we'll just kind of jump right in, start. Obviously, the Titans had a solid game, a preseason opener against the Atlanta Falcons over the weekend. You come back this week, they're having joint practices in Tampa Bay with the Buccaneers. So I figure there's no better place to start kind of talking about what stood out the most, whether it was the preseason game or whether it's just been practice in general, about what the Titans are doing well. And I think the thing that kind of jumped out to me the most during the preseason game, obviously, was Rashad Weaver. He had himself a day. He looked like a legit viable third option at outside linebacker behind Bud Dupree and Harold Landry. If he is eligible to play this season, he has his preliminary hearing, I think, on October 5th for his assault case. But if he is eligible to play, I think having him could be huge for this defense because it takes some of the pressure off of Bud Dupree, who's coming off that ACL injury, takes some of the pressure off Harold Landry, who basically had to do it all by himself because Jadeveon Clowney and Vic Beasley were of no use last year. Having someone like Rashad Weaver, who showed athleticism, speed, he got into the Falcons' backfield at will. Granted, that was against second and third teamers, but still, he showed that he can be a disruptive force. And I think that's something that this Titans defense will desperately need because you can't, yes, you're giving Bud Dupree $82.5 million, so you would like him to kind of produce the way you want him to, but putting everything on him, I think it's just going to be a little too much, especially in his first year. Harold Landry definitely needs some help. Danico Autry is going to help. I think Jeffrey Simmons will help, and the defensive line is going to be a force as well. But I think Rashad Weaver, if he's eligible to play and he's healthy, I think he could be a very unforeseen bright spot for this defense. So I'm kind of curious, Teresa, what was your assessment of Weaver, and what else aside from him stood out to you during the preseason opener?
Well, the fact that he had 1.5 sacks, tackle for loss, 2 quarterback hits, it was the kind of pressure on the quarterback that, let's face it, we just didn't see much at all out of this defense last year. So that was a very bright spot. And, they ended up with 5 sacks. And again, yes, they signed Bud Dupree. They've got Harold Landry. We didn't see them in the preseason game. They haven't seen Landry practice. I don't think I've seen him since I got back from Tokyo on August 9th. But here's the thing. You got to have depth. When Jadeveon Clowney went down, they didn't have any depth. Vic Beasley, when they cut him because they weren't getting anything from him, there was nobody to turn to. And Harold Landry was kind of left on an island by himself. Rashad Weaver will give them a number 3 guy, and keep an eye on Derek Roberson too, who had a pretty good day against the Tampa Bay Bucks in their joint practice, getting around the corner a little bit. So and would have had a sack, I think, at maybe 2 on Tom Brady in one drill. So, but with Rashad Weaver and a guy that they absolutely need to come through and be that guy for them to help this pass rush. Which, the reason we're so concerned about it was, they finished up ahead of Jacksonville and Cincinnati only because they had a really nice game at the end of the season against Houston. Now, I will say this, what he's facing in Pittsburgh is a simple assault charge. So, depending on what the outcome of that is, the NFL hasn't come down, could there be some punishment? Yes. First time offense, we believe. So, it may be one of those things that maybe he misses a game or 2. It's just tough to see, unless there's some evidence that hasn't been seen yet, it's just tough to see, him missing a ton of time because of that incident. Not a good incident, and we're all going to be keeping a close eye on it for sure. But, I'm not that concerned about that keeping him out of the lineup at this point. So, and they need him. I mean, he's got speed, and that's what I'm waiting for, is to see this defense. It looked good against Atlanta, that defense. I mean, 5 sacks, a turnover, David Long getting an interception, Breon Borders nearly had another. that they just overturned for, not having, it touched the ground. Sorry. Yeah, I thought it was a pick. They held Atlanta to 138 yards. And yes, while it was backups on backups, the Titans backups were good enough to beat the Atlanta Falcons backups by 20. And, that to me is a mark of where this team is, because I remember not too long ago when this team couldn't beat anybody. Forget it. That 2-year period where they were 5-27. A good cold had them in a corner sometimes. So, that is a mark of the improvement that they've made on this roster in putting this together, and why there's such high expectations for this franchise this year.
Yeah, I think you're right. With Weaver, we don't know what's going to happen. Like you said, as the facts are right now, it doesn't look like he's going to miss a significant amount of time. Maybe 1 or 2 game suspension, depending on how severe the outcome of his court case is. But like you said, there might be evidence that can come out, and this could turn into a half-season suspension. We don't know with these things. You never know. He seemed pretty confident it wasn't a big deal and it wasn't going to affect him. I hope that's the case, not just, to have a football player on the field, but I hope that's the case that this whole situation itself isn't as bad as it seems right now. You never want to hear of anyone, a football player or anybody, a man hitting a woman. But if the Titans do have him for most of the season, say he gets hit with a 2-game suspension and he is out there, I do think he is a big boost to this pass rush, because I think last year, I don't have the numbers in front of me exactly, but of their 19 sacks, I think only 3 or 4 maybe came from outside linebackers and defensive ends. The rest came from defensive tackles, from cornerbacks, from safeties. And I think if that's something that the media can pick up on, I think that's something that Shane Bowen has probably got to be ripping his hair about, thinking, we pay the defensive ends and the outside linebackers to get to the quarterback. And last year it was probably the biggest area of need for this team. The secondary struggled a little bit as well, but I think the pass rush, and we had Mike Herndon on from Broadway Sports a couple weeks ago, and he said that he thinks the pass rush, and I agreed with him, the pass rush is under a bigger microscope this year. The secondary had its flaws. They went through a lot of turnover as well. There's a lot of new guys in the secondary, but the pass rush is just so heavily scrutinized because, like you said, they just could not get to anybody last year. And I do think Derek Roberson, like you brought up, that's another good point to look out for too, because they do have some guys that have shown some glimpses here and there, but they just, for whatever reason, this team with the pass rush just cannot get going. Do you feel like with the new people they brought in, having a young guy like Rashad Weaver, maybe if Derek Roberson's fully healthy, do you think Shane Bowen is the guy to kind of, now that he can focus his sole attention on running the entire defense, he can get this pass rush up to where it needs to be?
Well, the fact that he's not also coaching outside linebackers and being coordinator, there's a lot of teams that, maybe can do that kind of thing, but we saw it didn't work last year. I mean, for a coordinator, he didn't have the title, but he had the job last year. And Mike Vrabel kept talking about affecting the quarterback. They couldn't affect the quarterback. It was just that simple. And they didn't have, it was part personnel, because the guys that they brought in to do it, Clowney and Beasley, provided nothing, literally not 1 sack combined between them. And I think they played something like 13 games. So, this year they go out and they get Rashad Weaver, they signed Bud Dupree, the development, hopefully, of Derek Roberson, Wyatt Ray, who had a sack and a half in that Falcons game as well. Finally, maybe giving them some depth. But the move that Shane Bowen should have the ability to better see the bigger picture. But don't overlook the fact that they brought in Jim Schwartz as a senior defensive assistant. This is a guy that, dating back to his tenure with the Titans, when he was defensive coordinator here, when he was Detroit's head coach, defensive coordinator with the Eagles when they won a Super Bowl. This is a guy that his defenses on his teams, whatever his role, get to the quarterback and they pile up sacks. So, that's a fresh perspective, maybe outside the Vrabel tree group, so to speak, that gives them maybe some different schemes, different thought process. And, sometimes it's a good thing when you've got somebody that from the outside that can say, well, wait a minute, why are you doing this? This worked here. Why don't we try this? So defense is going to be, we know what this offense, or we suspect what this offense will do. Last year, tied for second most in yards per game, 4th in the NFL in points. But the defense has got to take a massive step forward. And when I say massive, it's because they were at the bottom of so many categories in the NFL that a huge leap for them would be if they get to like 15th. if they're 15th in sacks, if they're 15th in third down, getting off the field on third down, think about how much of a boost that can provide to the offense, because they're going to be having the ball more. So that probably, out of the entire game on Friday night against the Falcons and the first day of the joint practices with the Bucs, the defense looked drastically different from last year. And I think that's partly Shane Bowen being able to, focus on defense rather than defense and a position group. But all these pieces, the personnel that they've changed, bringing in Schwartz, they saw a problem and they did as much as they could in one offseason, I think, to try and fix it.
Yeah, I think the Jim Schwartz addition is a great point to bring up. I think a lot of people were hoping it would be a defensive coordinator, 1A, 1B with Bowen and Schwartz. It's not the case. Schwartz is just simply a senior defensive analyst. But I think the thing that I remember most about, you're taking one of the better defensive coordinators over the last 2 decades and adding him as an extra pair of eyes on your defense. And one of the things about Jim Schwartz, especially when he was with the Eagles, is his defenses got after the quarterback. They were always, I think, in the top 10 pretty much every year, top 10, top 12 in sacks, quarterback pressures, quarterback hurries, all of that. So I really do think adding Jim Schwartz, it might rank up there in importance as adding a Bud Dupree. So that's how much of an impact Jim Schwartz can have. And I like that you brought up kind of how the defense has looked really good throughout training camp, especially in the first practice against the Bucs. They picked off Tom Brady 3 times. Granted, it's just practice. You're just out there in pads kind of running around. You're not really taking it too seriously, but future Hall of Fame quarterback, you intercept him 3 times. The defensive backs have looked really impressive. I think they have, through 14 practices in training camp, 17 interceptions. Ryan Tannehill's been picked off a couple of times as well. So they're not just kind of going through the motions. They're legitimately out there looking improved, which is what you want to see. And I think we all know what the Titans are going to get out of Jackrabbit Jenkins. I think Christian Fulton didn't see a lot of him last year, but I think from what we've seen through training camp so far, he's looked like he's ready to take on that starting cornerback role. One of the guys I want to talk about is Caleb Farley. They've eased him into the fray, so to speak. He saw mixed results yesterday in the practice with the Bucs. He did get burned a few times, which you're guarding Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Gronk. That's going to happen no matter who you are, no matter how good you are. But he did get burned a few times, but he had a really nice pass breakup against Mike Evans. I saw the videos of it, and what impressed me was it looked like he got beat initially. He kind of stumbled, got tangled up with Evans, however you want to phrase it. And then he turned around and he made an adjustment and knocked the ball away at the last second. That's what you want to see out of your first round pick. That's what you want to see out of a rookie who has all these injury questions that he has to answer for pretty much every time he's in front of the media. In your opinion, how do you think Caleb Farley fits into this Titans defense this year? And how do you think the cornerback group as a whole is kind of stacking up with what we've seen so far in training camp?
Well, it's an interesting mix. You've got the veteran presence of Jackrabbit Jenkins, Kevin Byard, a guy who just seemed to be at times, trying maybe too hard to try to make up for the problems that we saw on the front line and the lack of pass rush. It kind of felt like he was trying to do too much last year, but, they made cuts for salary cap purposes, but, Caleb Farley is, they drafted him to be the starting corner opposite of Jackrabbit Jenkins. I think they want Christian Fulton to be that slot guy. And then you've got Elijah Molden for depth. And, let's face it, Jackrabbit Jenkins is a veteran. He doesn't have a background or tenure of sticking around teams for a long time. So, they've got pieces there to learn from him and eventually replace him. But, they want Caleb Farley, if he can start this season, September 12th against Arizona, I think that's the goal, the hope for. That's why they've been kind of cautious with him, trying to, ever since he got off the non-football injury list, recovering from the surgery on his back in March, what dropped him, he might have been the first cornerback taken. So the talent's there. And, the 2 things that they've got to make sure he's physically ready, and they've got to get him to the point of knowing the defense. And then, he didn't play a game last year. He opted out for various reasons. So, getting him up to speed, I know that fans would like to see him, would have loved to have seen him in Atlanta. Mike Vrabel isn't tipping his hand as to whether or not he'll play on Saturday night. There's only one other opportunity after that against the Bears in Nashville on the 28th. So you'd like to see him, but the goal is to make sure that he stays healthy, and you get him up to speed physically and get him in with his defense, because he's got some skills as a cornerback. Kevin Byard's talked about it. One of the bad things is that, he's such a perfectionist. He thinks he should break up everything. And it's like, no, this is the NFL. The other guy gets paid too, don't get, and that's been Myers' message is don't get down on yourself, just go out and make the next play. So, he's having to adapt to the NFL where, that guy on the other side is just as good as he is. So, I think the goal, and here's the thing that we have to wait and see, is he starting against, maybe facing off against DeAndre Hopkins on September 12th. That's the hope, is for him to be a starter sooner rather than later, soon as possible is the hope.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point. Obviously, the fans want to see the team's first round pick in practice, and they want to hear about how he's doing and stuff. And that just hasn't been the case because I think the Titans are playing it smart. They realize they have a potential top 10 talent cornerback in Caleb Farley that they basically stole at the back half of the first round. And I think it's smart. He's had a couple back surgeries. He didn't play last year. You're talking about a guy whose last meaningful snaps came in the 2019 season. He has, I'm not saying he's rusty, but he has a year of inactivity to make up for. He does have the back surgeries, but I do think it'll be important to see if he does play Saturday. If not Saturday, you would think that he has to play against Chicago. If he doesn't play against Chicago, then I just don't see any way they can realistically throw him out there against Arizona in the season opener and be okay with it. But it is something to keep an eye on because I do think you're right. I think long-term, the plan, when I say long-term, I mean this year and the next 2 or 3 years, is to have Jack Rabbit as the number one corner, have Caleb Farley as your number two, have Christian Fulton in the slot, because we've seen a lot of Christian Fulton playing inside during training camp. And Mike Vrabel even said, he's like, we can slide him outside, we can keep him inside, we can do whatever we want with him. We can play him anywhere. And I think that's why they went out and they drafted Christian Fulton last year, because they noticed that. And Elijah Molden as well. He's someone who has played almost exclusively in the slot at college. He also has experience playing in safety. If Byard or Amani Hooker get injured, Elijah Molden's good insurance to have over there as well. I think the cornerback group is set up very well to be successful this year and beyond. And if Jack Rabbit's only here for a couple of years, if barring them signing, another veteran, you're set up. Your top 3 corners are going to be Caleb Farley, Christian Fulton, and Elijah Molden. Based off of their potential, that's a pretty good 1 through 3 punch to have in your defensive backfield. So I do think you're right. I think that the transition plan is set up, and I think even for this year, Caleb Farley, if he's healthy, is going to be given every opportunity to go out there and be the star we all think he can be.
Oh, absolutely. And remember this, AJ Brown's going to be looking for an extension, after this year. Jeffrey Simmons, another guy that could have been a top 10 pick that because of injury issues fell to them at number 19. So, they've got to be cheap at one position group so that they can pay some of these other guys in the next year and a half. So that's why they need these rookies to come through for them, Fulton, the second year guy, to come through for them and be their starters, because you got to be cheap. It's the same reason why they keep looking at, Tucker McCann and Sam Ficken. They're Stephen Gostkowski has a house in Williamson County, and it feels like he's kind of behind glass in case of emergency. But the reason they're working so hard to help develop a kicker is they've got to save some money in some places. And so cornerback, safety, that secondary, think about it. A year ago, it was Malcolm Butler, Kenny Vaccaro, Adoree Jackson getting, big contracts and costing an awful lot of money. They're gone. And that's what, that's another reason for some of those changes. They needed money to go get Bud Dupree and Danico Autry. And guess what? We'll find, look, so far in training camp, it looks like that they've made those changes without hurting themselves and actually maybe improving themselves on the field where it matters most.
All very, very good points to consider too. Kind of transitioning to the next topic, I want to spend a little time talking about the wide receivers. It's almost the most talked about position group on this team, and for good reason, because it's what you have. We think it's going to be 6 spots for basically 9 or 10 guys competing right now. And we had Luke Worsham on the podcast a couple weeks ago from A to Z Sports, and we talked about this could be the deepest group of wide receivers the Titans have ever had. AJ Brown, Julio Jones aren't practicing for good reason. You want them to be healthy for the regular season. Don't take a chance with them in the preseason or very much in training camp. But Marcus Johnson and Chester Rogers have kind of taken their opportunity they've been given in camp and kind of seized it by the throat. They both have been, it almost seems like every practice you walk away and you hear about an amazing play Marcus Johnson made, or you hear about an explosive play Chester Rogers made. In the preseason game, Rogers had that beautiful 57-yard punt return. I think that's going to, his versatility as a punt returner as well as a receiver is going to lead to him ultimately getting a roster spot. But I do think, been hearing a lot about Marcus Johnson, how impressive he's looked. And I think, I remember who it was, one of the Titans reporters tweeted out something about they wouldn't be surprised if Marcus Johnson came up and competed with Josh Reynolds for that number 3 spot. That might be a little presumptuous, but that just shows how impressive Marcus Johnson has been. So I want to get your take on these two guys, because up to this point in their careers, neither one of them has shown themselves to be anything more than a depth receiver. But you could make the argument they haven't been given the chance that they're given right now with the Titans in training camp. So out of Marcus Johnson, Chester Rogers, which one has looked more important? And do you think they both make the roster?
As of now, I'm going to lean, now granted, August 19th, I'm going to say, yes, they make the roster. Chester Rogers has got the, special teams is going to be the deciding factor for the guys 3, 4, 5, 6. It's tough to see him keeping 7 because, I can only really remember one time that they kept 7. And it didn't last for long. Once they had to need another position, that 7th guy was gone and they brought in that guy. So we're expecting 6 people. Yes. I mean, Des Fitzpatrick, even though he was the 4th round pick, has just done nothing to impress. Mike Vrabel told us the other day that he's got to show, what does he have to show? A lot more. And the clock is ticking. Every day we get closer to September and roster cuts. So, Chester Rogers, sometimes it just takes being in the right place at the right time for a guy to blossom. I mean, quarterbacks seem to be the position that get run through the most. If you don't win that job in your first time, it's on to the next guy. Well, it kind of happens with wide receivers as well. And Marcus Johnson told us, I think last week, that, he's worked an awful lot on his skills since he got to the NFL with a couple of different position coaches. And, he was with a team in Philly that, won a Super Bowl I think in 2017, and he's been with Indy the last couple of years, and, kind of where maybe the Titans really saw him and decided they wanted him. And again, sometimes another man's trash is another man's treasure. So, Josh Reynolds, it's a good thing he got back. He's been dealing with an Achilles, and, he had a really great catch in the open practice at Nissan Stadium, plus 50-yarder from Ryan Tannehill, showing that, that's why they signed him from the Rams. So it was a good thing that he's gotten back and available, because these other 2 guys are coming for his playing time and his snaps. So, and at the bottom of this roster, Cam Batson, a guy that's just stuck around and done things. They've liked Nick Westbrook-Akina over the years, the last year and a half, and, he just keeps doing some good things. And then, there's Racey McMath, their 7th round pick, who, again, special team skills. Not only can he be a returner, he's got some speed and he can help you in other facets. So I kind of like Racey McMath to find a way into that group. And then, some of these other guys, they're likely playing for jobs on other teams at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that going into the second preseason game and with as much camp as we've seen so far, that Des Fitzpatrick, someone who you traded up 15 spots, I think it was, to go get this kid, is in serious danger of being cut from this team and not making the roster. But on the other side of that, all these other guys, Chester Rogers, Marcus Johnson, Mason Kinsey, you said Cam Batson, there's been so many guys that have really taken advantage of their opportunities. And Des Fitzpatrick, I don't know if he's not taking it seriously, if he just didn't expect to get this much of a fight for some of these other guys who were signed as free agent veterans. I don't know what his thinking is there, but he's definitely in serious danger of getting cut. And at this point, you could argue that Racey McMath has been better than Des Fitzpatrick, outplaying him, drafted three rounds later. I do think Cam Batson's also someone to keep an eye on. I think he played pretty well last year, and kind of some of the spot duty that he got as well. Mason Kinsey's someone who's been around. He had a really good game against Atlanta as well. So I think the competition is just fascinating to watch, because you're looking at, realistically, we know it's AJ Brown, Julio Jones, Josh Reynolds 1 through 3. Then you're looking at 3 more spots, and you have a hard time. You would assume Marcus Johnson, Chester Rogers are probably 4 and 5, somewhere in there. When you're looking at the 6th spot, it's like, do you go with Cam Batson, who you have and you kind of know what you got with him last year? Do you give someone like Mason Kinsey a shot? Do you take a flyer, on Des Fitzpatrick and hope that he kind of turns it around? Do you maybe cut him and give Racey McMath the opportunity? There's just so many options you can go at this point. with the receivers you have. And I think it's something it's been the more intriguing thing, the more fascinating thing to me to watch in camp, just because any given point with AJ Brown and Julio Jones not practicing, all of these guys have an opportunity to go out and wow the coaches. And so far, Chester Rogers and Marcus Johnson have been the only two that have really taken advantage of that.
Well, at this point, I easily have Racey McMath as my number 6. Now, I could be wrong on that, but Des Fitzpatrick, you cut him, and it's like with the stars coming out of high school. Sometimes 5 stars don't develop, and guess what? Sometimes draft picks just don't, for whatever reason, whatever's going on, just don't develop, and other guys seize the opportunity. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how these guys, how they put this roster together at the end of the preseason.
Yeah, as a 49ers fan, it just gives me flashbacks of Rashad Woods and AJ Jenkins, 2 first-round receivers that I think 2 or 3 years later, they're not even with the team anymore. And it's sometimes it's baffling to think that especially at receiver, there's just such a high risk of them flaming out, because you don't know what you're going to get going from college offenses to pro offenses, college quarterbacks and coaches to pro quarterbacks and coaches. And I think that's what we're seeing with Des Fitzpatrick. I think the potential is there. I think he's just not ready for it right now. And you can make the argument that Racey McMath is the Titans' best rookie receiver at this point, just because he adds the speed, he adds the special teams. I think on the second or third day of camp, he had a really good play where he went up in the end zone at the highest point, caught the ball, came down with it. It was really impressive to watch him. And I think you're right. I think right now he probably is the number 6 guy, because he does give you that flair on special teams. He has that speed, and Des Fitzpatrick hasn't really shown much.
Exactly. If Chester Rogers ends up being the punt returner, you've got Racey McMath out there as a gunner because of his speed, and and that's something that can be tough. For the guys who didn't play special teams in college, it's such an issue. And I'm just going to say this: one reason why it's such a battle at not just at wide receiver, but so many positions. It's another mark that the roster quality has been raised for the Titans. You've got guys who are going to come here trying to make this roster who might, not go to another team because they know this team has high expectations. They've 5 straight winning seasons, coming off a division title. Those are the kind of things that are now showing some other benefits to the Tennessee Titans. It's not just about win-loss record, how far you go in the playoffs, getting people in the stands. This can end up being a thing that helps you improve your roster as well, and yet another side benefit.
Yeah, I completely agree. We'll kind of transition and finish off here with the last thing I want to talk about, and that's the backup quarterback battle. It's almost laughable at this point how many quarterbacks Logan Woodside has outlasted. You bring in Matt Barkley, and they both look decent against Atlanta, but I think it's very clear that Logan Woodside is the better option at this point. For whatever reason, I just kind of get Alex Tanney vibes from him. He's not great, he's not bad, he's just good enough for you to keep around because no one better has come along and beat him. The Titans coaching staff, it just seems like they want to give him every opportunity to succeed, and he keeps beating out everybody. I mean, Trevor Siemian, Deshaun Kaiser, Matt Barkley probably going to be the next guy. I wanted to get your opinion on Logan Woodside, because he's a very polarizing figure for a backup quarterback. A lot of people in Nashville have strong opinions on Logan Woodside, and whether he is actually a good backup quarterback or whether he's just the best of the worst that you've been bringing in. So I want to get your opinion on what you think Logan Woodside is.
Well, I think Titan fans are having panic attacks over the thought of Woodside as the backup for another season, because think about it. For so many years, remember the Zach Metz show. Mettenberger went over as the starting quarterback when he was pressed into duty, and there's Titan fans have seen a revolving door at quarterback over the years until Ryan Tannehill stepped in and took over the job. So I think that's part of the reason for panic. It's like, well, he's going to get hurt sometime, right? We got to have a good backup. We got to have somebody who can win a game. But coaches like Logan Woodside, he knows the offense. He knows where to go with the ball. What we've seen maybe today in Tampa and in that game against Atlanta is, well, he didn't have the starting offensive line in front of him, which doesn't help. And some of those guys, there was pressure leaking through, which didn't help him. But the throw he made, the back shoulder throw to Cam Batson for the touchdown, there's been a question: is his arm strong enough to make some of those throws? His best pro experience was in the very short-lived AAFL. So I think it was AAFL, and it was in San Antonio. So You want to see him air it out some more. Can he stand up under the pressure? But, the fact that he knows what the coaches want him to do, that's a big plus and a big advantage that you're going to have to come in and just truly, beat him out for that job, because, it's not going to take that much, I think, for Woodside to hold on to it again.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's almost funny to think that like his best starting experience came in the AAFL that played like 7 or 8 games and then folded and was a very mismanaged league. But it's still considered professional football. He still had 7 or 8 games of starting experience over there. He wasn't a scrub at Toledo. He had a decent career there. I don't think he's ever going to be a starting quarterback in the NFL, but I think he's good enough to do what you want under your backup quarterback. If your starter goes down, you want a backup that you feel like you can start for 4 or 5 games and at least have a 500 record. And I think Logan Woodside can do that, especially being able to hand the ball off to Derrick Henry. You have Julio Jones, AJ Brown, Josh Reynolds. We think Anthony Ferguson is going to be a solid tight end. He's one of the better pass catching tight ends. Jeff Swaim is a very good run blocking tight end. I feel like the offense is set up that if you have to roll with Logan Woodside for 4 or 5 games, there's worse guys in the world that you could have leading your offense. And I think Matt Barkley, he hasn't really stuck anywhere, and he hasn't really. You talk about 5 stars not panning out in college. Matt Barkley's a prime example. He was the top recruit in the nation a couple years ago. Everyone thought he was the next Matt Leinart going to USC. He came out, wasn't really that good. Went to the NFL, kind of just bounced around. And I think there's a reason he hasn't stuck as a backup quarterback. And I think Logan Woodside, we're talking about sticking as a backup quarterback. Logan Woodside has. He's taken on everyone that's come and challenged him for his throne, so to speak. And he's kind of disposed of them one by one. Deshaun Kaiser, Trevor Siemian, Barkley, you could even say all 3 have stronger arms than Logan Woodside does, but he's beaten all 3 of them out for this backup job. And I think that goes to show being a successful backup quarterback is about more than just who has the stronger arm. I think Woodside is a better decision maker. I think he knows the offense better than all 3 of the other guys did. And I think that's why we've seen him stick around for so long.
You're absolutely right, Michael. I mean, having a strong arm doesn't help you if you're not throwing to the person that you need to be throwing to in the progressions, that you're not, if you're not calling the right play, or if you're not, putting the team in the right position, then, it doesn't matter. I mean, it just doesn't matter how strong your arm is. I mean, there's been a lot of quarterbacks survive in this league as backups because they know what they're doing as the backup and with the ball and caretaker. I mean, shoot, Jason Garrett, anyone? I mean, he comes in, has a great Thanksgiving Day game and, some spot duty, but, that's the kind of the goal of what you hope for, a guy that, you don't have to, I'm curious to see how long it takes them to really solidify and they quit bringing in these guys, because I do think that Logan Woodside is kind of close. It almost feels like they want to make sure they're pushing him to help him develop, because the last thing you want out of any player is to think that they've got the job, because then maybe they ease up. And the one thing about the NFL, and shoot, in any industry, particularly ours as well, the instant you start easing up, somebody else is going to come and take your job because you're not going to do it right. And so I think that may be the biggest reason why they keep bringing in guys trying to push him.
Yes, I think you are right on the money. And I do think you're right. I think Logan Woodside is almost where you want him to be as a backup. I think we might be a year or so, maybe a little more away of them stop bringing in these guys, because you don't need to. You don't need to know. You don't need to have that competition, because Logan Woodside is your guy. Thank you for joining me, Teresa. This was a very fun podcast. I was knocked out of the ring last week with a terrible sinus infection, so we had to delay the podcast a week. But I think it was worth the wait, because I think we just hit everything right on the head with what fans want to know about this team. So thank you for joining me. You can follow Teresa on Twitter at Teresa M. Walker, and you can read her stuff at AP, the Associated Press, on their website as well.
My pleasure, Michael. Thank you.